Get out of my house. From now on, you're no longer part of this family." The words didn't echo. They landed, heavy, like a door slamming somewhere inside my chest. The real door followed a second later. Bang. 3 turns of the lock. The sound of metal grinding against metal felt louder than any scream. I stood on the porch, still holding the bouquet of lilies I'd bought for my son's birthday. The paper wrap crinkled under my fingers. The scent of pollen and dust mixed with the sharp smell of fresh paint. One petal fell, then another, leaving yellow stains on my shoes, the same pair I'd worn the day we moved into this house. I built this place, literally. I drew the plans, restored the wooden beams, chose the glass that caught morning light. I thought I was building a home for my son and his wife. Turns out, I'd built a fortress I wasn't allowed to enter. For a moment, I didn't move. I kept waiting for the handle to turn again, for someone to say, "Mom, wait, it's just a misunderstanding." Nothing. Only the muffled sound of laughter from inside, and the slow hum of the refrigerator I'd bought last Christmas. The street was strangely quiet. A dog barked in the distance. The air was warm, but my hands felt cold, the kind of cold that starts in your bones. I looked down at the keys in my palm. 5 of them, silver, worn smooth by years of use. My name was engraved on the little tag. M.H. I had made them myself, back when I still believed a key meant belonging. Now it just meant exclusion. A neighbor across the street peeked through her curtains. I turned away quickly, pretending to adjust my scarf. Pride, I realized, is the last coat you put on when the world strips everything else off. I set the flowers gently on the front step. "They'll wilt faster than I did," I muttered. Then I walked down the path I had paved with my own hands. Each stone seemed to remember my weight, the rhythm of my footsteps, the years of coming home. As I reached the gate, I stopped. The iron latch squeaked. I had promised to oil it months ago, but never did. Funny how you notice the small things only when they're closing behind you. The wind shifted. I caught a faint echo of my son's voice from inside, low, impatient, maybe relieved. I didn't want to hear the words. I already knew them. Oh, my throat tightened. I wanted to shout, to pound the door, to remind them whose fingerprints were still under the paint. But I didn't. I just stood there, breathing in the dust of my own exile. When I finally turned the corner, the house disappeared from view, but the sound of that lock turning 3 times kept replaying in my head like a clock marking the hour my old life ended. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just walked, slower than usual, letting the city blur around me. The streetlights flickering on, the smell of coffee from the diner, the rhythm of someone else's evening. And somewhere between one breath and the next, the truth arrived. When the door locked behind me, I finally learned who truly held the key. I wasn't always the woman standing outside her own front door. For 25 years, I built homes for other people. Not the kind you see in magazines. I specialized in restoring old houses across New Orleans, places with cracked walls and ghosts of better days. I used to joke that I could tell a building's pain just by touching its bricks. Maybe that's why I never noticed my own life crumbling. My name is Margaret Hale, and before I was a mother-in-law no one wanted, I was known as the woman who could bring dead wood back to life. I started young. After my husband died, a heart attack at 42, right in the middle of pouring concrete for our first renovation, I raised my son alone. Work was the only way I knew to keep breathing. I repaired columns eaten by termites, replastered ceilings, sanded staircases until they glowed again. My hands were always raw, my nails always chipped. But every scar had a story. I used to think I was restoring houses. The truth was, they were restoring me. When my son, Evan, got married, I thought the universe was finally giving something back. He brought home a beautiful young woman named Claire. Soft voice, sharp eyes, the kind of person who could turn a compliment into a command. I wanted to believe she loved him. And maybe, at first, she did. A year into their marriage, Claire found an old colonial house built in 1929. It was falling apart. Leaky roof, peeling paint, floors that groaned like they had secrets. She said she loved the vintage charm, but Evan said the price was too high. I didn't even hesitate. I told them, let me handle it. I poured every dollar of my savings, $327,000 in cash, the rest from my retirement fund, into that house. I told myself I was investing in their future. I didn't see that I was buying my own eviction notice. For a year, that place became my heartbeat. I picked every color of paint, pale seafoam for the walls, sunlight ivory for the trim, hues that made mornings feel kinder. I chose brass doorknobs that warmed with touch, the same kind I had in my childhood home. And when the final coat dried, I stood in the hallway, breathing in the scent of fresh paint and dust, the smell of beginnings. Evan hugged me that day, tight, his eyes wet. "Mom, you're an angel," he whispered. "You didn't just fix a house, you built a home." I laughed through tears. "Just promise me one thing," I said. "Never change the locks," he promised. I should have known. Promises don't last longer than the paint on a door. 3 years passed. The house shone like it was proud to be alive again. Claire filled it with candles and expensive furniture, none of which matched the old bones of the place, but I said nothing. Sometimes, on weekends, I'd come over to prune the garden or polish the stair rail. I'd always leave quietly, closing the door like a caretaker leaving a museum after hours. Then little things began to shift. Claire stopped calling me Mom and started saying Margaret. Evan stopped offering to carry my toolbox. My old bedroom, the small guest room with the blue curtains, became Claire's home office. One day, I came to drop off homemade gumbo. The key didn't turn. When I asked, Claire smiled politely. "Oh, we had to change the locks for security, hope you don't mind." Her tone was sugar. The cut was steel. That was the first time I felt the house reject me. Not through words, but through the silence of a key that no longer fit. I started to notice details I had once loved turning against me. The brass knob I'd chosen now shone too bright, like an eye that watched me. The porch swing creaked in the wind, the same way my chest did when I tried not to cry. Still, I told myself it was fine. I'd built enough homes to know. Every structure needs a little distance to stand on its own. Then came the birthday. The same one I walked into in part 1. I'd spent the week knitting a throw blanket, the color of the house's first coat of paint. I wrapped it neatly, tied with a silver ribbon, and stopped by the florist for lilies, the kind Evan used to pick for me when he was 5. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick. Claire's friends were there, all in sleek dresses, their laughter cutting through the music. Evan looked startled, then uncomfortable. Claire's lips curved, but her voice was ice. "Oh, you're here." She turned to the others, her tone light. "This is Margaret, the architect. She used to own the house." Used to. That word hit harder than the door ever did. Someone asked me if it was true that I'd lived here. I smiled, trying to stay steady. "Yes," I said. "I even built that staircase." Claire laughed softly, shaking her head. "You mean you renovated it? We had to fix a lot after that." The room laughed with her. I caught Evan's eyes. He looked away. I left before the candles were blown out. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my toolbox. Inside, under the measuring tape and paint swatches, lay my old key ring, 5 silver keys and a small tag that said Hail and Sun. 2019. I ran my thumb over the engraving until the edges felt warm. Those keys had once meant pride, family, home. Now they were nothing but ghosts of doors that no longer opened. I couldn't throw them away. Not yet. Because somewhere deep down, I still believed what I always told my clients when restoring old houses. Every lock has a key. You just have to remember where you hid it. I didn't know then that someday those same keys would lead me back into a house with my name on the deed again. But next time, no one would ever have the power to turn me out. When I was 24, I lived in a borrowed trailer on the edge of Plaquemines Parish, a place where hurricanes came as often as birthdays. Every morning, I'd wake to the smell of wet wood and diesel, pull my hair into a knot, and head to the construction site. Back then, I was the only woman on the crew. The only one who didn't curse when a beam slipped or a nail bent. The men used to laugh. "You sure you can lift that, sweetheart?" And I'd answer, "If I can carry my rent and my pride at the same time, I can carry a damn beam." They stopped laughing after that. We were building storm shelters for low-income families. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls, a tin roof, and a promise of safety. But to me, each one felt like a cathedral. Every nail I hammered was a prayer. Let this roof hold. Let this door stay closed when the wind screams. Sometimes, after work, I'd stand in the doorway of those half-finished houses and imagine living there. No chandelier, no marble, no fine china. Just a space where I could breathe without asking permission. That was the dream. One day, I'll build a home no one can throw me out of. I whispered it the way some people whisper to God. My mentor then was a man named Raymond Boone, a retired architect with nicotine-stained fingers and eyes that saw beauty in broken things. He taught me that houses, like people, could heal if you treated their cracks with respect. One rainy afternoon, he handed me my first real blueprint and said, "Don't just draw walls, Margaret. I'll draw forgiveness into them, because one day, you'll need a place that forgives you back." At 24, I didn't understand. At 58, I finally did. There was one house that stayed with me all these years, the first one I ever rebuilt alone. It belonged to an old widow named Mrs. Freshen Lang, whose roof had blown off during Hurricane Andrew. She had no money, no family, just a cat named Boots and a rosary that she kept clutched like an anchor. I worked nights to finish her home. The town said it wasn't worth saving, the foundation was cracked, the walls soft with mold. But I couldn't walk away. On the last day, Mrs. Lang came out with a glass of sweet tea, her hands trembling. "Child," she said, "why are you doing all this for me?" I smiled, because one day someone might do the same for me. She pressed something into my palm, a small silver key tied with a piece of red yarn. "And take this," she said. "When life locks you out, remember you've already built your way in once." I kept that key for years. Later, when I started restoring old homes professionally, I had it melted down and turned into part of my keyring, the one with my initials engraved. I used to think it was just a sentimental charm. Now I know it was prophecy. When the storms came, and they always came, I'd stand on the roofs we built and watch the horizon split open with lightning. The wind would howl like an angry god, but the walls I raised would hold. There was a pride in that, in surviving what was meant to erase you. Maybe that's why I became so obsessed with fixing houses. Every structure I saved felt like defying fate itself. I wasn't just patching roofs. I was proving I could keep things standing, no matter how hard the wind blew. But the irony was cruel. I could keep houses alive, yet I couldn't keep people close. When Evan was born, I promised myself I'd give him a home so solid he'd never feel what I did. That cold fear of being without a place to belong. I thought if I built strong enough walls around him, life couldn't hurt him. I never realized those walls might keep me out too. Sometimes at night, even now, I dream of that first storm shelter. I see my younger self, mud on my face, blueprints fluttering in the wind, standing in the doorway of something half-built, whispering to the rain, "Hold, please hold." And I wake up with the same thought pulsing in my chest. I built homes so no one else would have to beg for shelter. I just never thought I'd be the one locked outside. The dream always ends the same way, with the sound of a key turning in a lock. But this time, I'm the one holding it. It started so small, I almost missed it. Like a loose screw in a staircase, the kind you only notice when it's too late and the step gives way. Claire was standing in the doorway that morning, her phone balanced between shoulder and cheek, keys jingling in her hand. "Oh, Mom. By the way, we changed the front lock. The old one jammed last night. I'll make you a copy later, okay?" She said it so casually, like mentioning the weather. I smiled. Out of habit more than belief. "Sure, honey, safety first." But something in my chest stuttered. Not a sharp pain. Just a quiet drop, like the moment the elevator pauses before descending. A lock. A new key. A subtle rearrangement of ownership. I told myself it was nothing. I even laughed later, telling a friend, they're just being careful. But that night, when I reached for my old keyring, the silver caught the kitchen light and looked almost guilty. A few days later, I stopped by with a jar of peach preserves and found the alarm system blinking red. Claire's voice floated from the hallway. Oh, the new system's sensitive. You'll need a code now to get in. I'll text it to you. She never did. Instead, she handed me coffee at the counter like a guest. The smell was the same as always, cinnamon, vanilla creamer, but the air felt tighter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Evan came down the stairs, adjusting his tie. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek quickly. His eyes darted toward Claire, then to the new keypad on the wall. Something unsaid passed between them. I felt it. I always do, the moment a house stops being mine. After that, the invitations changed tone. Before, it was, "Mom, drop by anytime." Now it was, "Text me first so we're home." I told myself, they just wanted privacy. Every generation builds its walls differently. Still, one Sunday afternoon, I drove by and parked across the street. The curtains were new, heavy beige drapes that blocked all light. Even the porch swing I'd hung myself was gone. The space where it used to be was just two empty hooks, dangling in the wind. A house always tells you when it doesn't want you anymore. The next week, I called Claire. I left my old gardening gloves there. "Mind if I swing by?" "Oh, I think we donated them." "You said you didn't need them, right?" I hadn't said that. But I heard the faint sound of amusement in her voice, soft, polite, final. That evening, I went home and laid the silver keyring on my desk. 5 keys, all worn differently. One for the gate, one for the main door, one for the shed, one for the attic, and one I'd kept since Mrs. Dass. Lang's storm shelter, decades ago. I tried the main key against my palm. Its teeth had left small grooves over the years, the shape of trust pressed into skin. It was just metal. I remember whispering to the empty room. Funny how safety always means someone else gets to decide who's inside. A few days later, Claire called again. "Mom, do you mind if we move the blueprints from the study? We're converting it into a nursery." Nursery. The word should have made me happy. Instead, it landed like a warning bell. That was my room. My drafting table, my rolled sketches, my pencils still lined up by color. "Of course," I said softly. "It's your house now." I don't know why I said that. Maybe because I needed to hear how wrong it sounded. She thanked me sweetly, promised to store everything carefully. When I came by the next week, the study was empty. The table was gone. Even the faint smell of sawdust, the one scent that made the house feel like mine, had been scrubbed out. Only one thing remained, a small paint stain on the floor shaped like a teardrop. I knelt down, touched it, and smiled to myself. They could change locks, repaint walls, throw away furniture, but they'd never erase that mark. It was proof I'd been there once. Proof that, for a while, the house had let me in. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind pushed against my apartment window, making it rattle. For a split second, I thought I heard the creak of that missing porch swing, echoing from miles away. And in the dark, I understood what I hadn't wanted to admit. One changed lock isn't about safety. It's the first brick in a wall being built between you and everything you once called yours. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind that smells like peace. Fresh coffee, morning light sliding through the blinds, and a vase of white tulips on the table. I was trimming the stems when the knock came. 3 short taps. Polite, professional, cold. When I opened the door, a man in a gray suit was standing there, his briefcase already unlatched. "Mrs. Hale? I'm James Porter, representing your son, Mr. Evan Hale." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Representing? My son? He smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they're about to sell you something you already own. "It's a simple matter, ma'am. Just some paperwork for a refinancing plan. If you sign here, it'll help your son and daughter-in-law secure a better loan rate." Behind him, Claire stood in the driveway, arms folded, her sunglasses reflecting the morning sun like knives. I invited them in. Out of habit. Out of denial. The house smelled of polish and flowers. My own hands smelled of soil. The lawyer placed a folder on the table. The papers were crisp. Too white. This is just a transfer of title. Temporary, of course, he said. To simplify ownership while we process the loan. I nodded slowly, flipping through the pages. My fingers left faint smudges on the margins, fingerprints of suspicion. And then I saw it. Near the bottom, in fine print barely visible unless the light hit just right. Full and irrevocable rights to sell, transfer, or dispose of the property at discretion of title holder. Full. Irrevocable. 2 words that erase a lifetime. I looked up. Why am I not the title holder anymore? The lawyer adjusted his glasses. It's just a streamline, I interrupted. No. I mean, why does it say Claire Hale as the sole owner? For a second, silence hung in the air. Even the tulips seemed to stop breathing. Claire stepped forward, voice sweet, rehearsed. Mom, don't make this dramatic. You said you wanted to help. This is how you can. Or house. I stared at her. She didn't flinch. The air between us tightened, like a string being tuned past breaking. And if I don't sign? I asked. Her smile thinned. Then we can't refinance. Which means we can't stay. So, she looked me straight in the eye. You'll have to move out. The words landed soft, but they detonated inside me. Evan was standing behind her, silent, his face unreadable. I turned to him. Evan, say something. He avoided my gaze. Mom, it's just business. Claire knows what she's doing. It's for the family. The family. How strange that the word could sound like a threat. I felt my throat tighten. Evan, I built this house. Every window, every floorboard. Claire cut me off, and we're grateful. But it's time we took responsibility. You've done enough. Done enough. My hands began to tremble. I gripped the edge of the table to keep them still. The papers fluttered slightly, catching the draft from the ceiling fan. For a moment, I saw everything at once. The blueprint sketches rolled in my studio, the night sanding wood until my hands bled, the day Evan called me his angel. All of it collapsing into this one, quiet act of betrayal. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale, if you'd like, I can walk you through the sections. I shook my head. I know how to read, Mr. Porter. He looked relieved, assuming compliance. He didn't realize I wasn't reading the contract anymore. I was memorizing every word of my own erasure. Then something in me steadied, that old, stubborn part of me that once built walls against hurricanes. I placed the papers back in the folder and closed it carefully, aligning the corners. Tell me, Mr. Porter, I said softly, do you know how many doors this house has? He blinked, confused. No, ma'am. 14, I said. 14 doors. I designed each one myself, and every door has a key that fits only because I made it that way. You change one lock, the whole pattern collapses. He nodded, uncertain. I turned to Claire. You changed one lock, Claire. And now, look where we are. Her jaw tightened. This isn't about locks. No, I said. It's about ownership. And it seems I don't belong in my own design anymore. I gathered the folder, walked to the front door, and handed it back to the lawyer. Tell my son I won't be signing anything today. Evan finally spoke, his voice low. Tnom, don't do this. I turned the knob slowly. The new knob, colder than the old one, and stepped outside. The morning light hit the tulips on the table, making them look almost artificial. Already did, I said, the day I gave you this house. And I closed the door behind me. As I walked down the path, the wind lifted a single tulip petal and carried it past my shoulder. I watched it fall, spinning like a piece of paper waiting for someone else's signature. And for the first time, I understood the mistake wasn't in the architecture. It was in my faith. Maybe, I whispered, I designed the wrong kind of foundation, not the house, but the people living in it. Or maybe that's just another kind of structural flaw you can't see until the walls come down. That evening, I packed a single suitcase. No boxes, no furniture, no photos. Just clothes, my drafting pencils, and the old silver keyring that no longer opened anything. The apartment I found was small. One room above a laundromat, with peeling wallpaper and a window that looked out over the back alley. The walls smelled faintly of detergent and rain. When I closed the door behind me, it clicked with a sound that wasn't betrayal, just emptiness. I dropped the keys on the counter. They made a dull metallic clink, the kind of sound that used to mean home, but now just echoed. For a long time, I sat there, listening to the washing machines below. The rhythmic churn of water sounded almost like waves, or maybe breathing. That's when the thought came. Simple, absurd, and yet sharper than any argument. If I can rebuild a rotted house, why can't I rebuild myself? The question landed like a hammer hitting truth. I'd spent half my life restoring wood, walls, and ceilings for other people, sealing their cracks, fixing their leaks, watching them smile in homes I'd saved. But I'd never once stopped to ask what it would take to restore me. That night, I opened my old sketchbook. The pages were warped from humidity, filled with notes in smudged pencil. On the first blank page, I drew a simple line. A roof, a doorway, a foundation, not for a client, for myself. I wrote one word underneath, rebuild. It wasn't a design, it was a vow. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. My body still moved like it had work to do. Years of habit don't die easy. I made coffee from the tiny machine on the counter, opened the curtains, and watched the first strip of light crawl across the cracked window pane. It hit the silver keys lying on the table, making them glint faintly. For a second, they almost looked alive again. I picked them up and turned them over in my palm. Their teeth caught the light, each one slightly worn, imperfect, but still capable of opening something if I just found the right door. "You used to open a house," I whispered to them. "Now you'll open a life." 2 days later, I got a call from an old colleague. Amelia Brooks, a curator I'd worked with years ago when I restored an art gallery after a flood. "Margaret," she said, "I heard you left New Orleans. Are you still designing?" I hesitated. "Not lately." "Fleeble. Good. Then you're due. The Seabrook Historical Museum needs someone to redesign their East Wing. Small job. Quiet town by the coast. You'd like it." Quiet sounded good. She emailed me the details that evening. I read them twice. A restoration project near the ocean, stone walls, salt air, a place that had survived storms of its own. Something inside me stirred. I wasn't ready, but maybe that was the point. That week, I packed my sketchbooks, a measuring tape, and the key ring. I didn't know why I took it. Maybe because every architect needs a reminder of what not to build again. The bus to Seabrook took 6 hours. As it rumbled through backroads, I watched the world unfold outside. Pine trees, broken fences, glimpses of water. For the first time in months, the horizon looked open. When I arrived, the air smelled of salt and rust. The museum was small, worn, its brick walls streaked white from years of sea wind. A handwritten sign on the door said, "Closed for restoration." I laughed out loud. "Aren't we all?" I murmured. The caretaker, an old man named Henry, handed me a ring of keys. "They're all yours for now," he said. I took them. Felt their weight. There was something poetic about it. Losing one set of keys only to be trusted with another. I walked through the empty hallways. The floors creaked, the windows rattled, and the ceiling leaked in one corner. But I saw what it could be. I always do. Light falling through dust. Walls that just needed to remember what it felt like to hold themselves up. Spaces waiting for a reason to exist again. Just like me. That night, I worked until the tide came in. The sound of waves outside the window replaced the hum of the old washing machines back in the city. I drew, erased, redrew. The same lines over and over until they started to make sense. Around midnight, I leaned back and looked at the sketch of the new exhibit hall. Strong beams. Open glass. Enough space for light and people and silence to coexist. A home for history. Not for ownership, but for memory. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel locked out. When I finally turned off the lamp, the silver keys glinted faintly on the desk beside the new set Henry had given me. Old and new. Past and possible. Maybe, I whispered, the problem wasn't that I gave away too many keys, it's that I kept giving them to the wrong doors. The sea had begun to sound like a clock. Each wave came in measured rhythm. Steady. Predictable. Merciless. I had been in Seabrook for 2 months. Long enough for the locals to nod when they saw me, not long enough for them to ask questions. The museum walls were finally standing straight, the roof repaired, the light slanting through the windows exactly as I'd imagined it. And yet, some nights, when the tide went quiet, I could still hear the door slam from that morning in New Orleans. Silence doesn't forget. It just waits. One evening, while reviewing blueprints, my phone buzzed. A message. From Evan. Mom, please stop complicating things. We're trying to sort the finances. You don't live there anymore, okay? Don't make this harder than it has to be. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Then another message came. Mom, don't make it difficult for us. You have no place in that house. The words were cold, rehearsed, probably not even his own. I could almost hear Claire behind them, choosing each syllable carefully. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I typed 3 words. It's not yours. Then deleted them. Instead, I turned the phone face down on the table and listened to the faint hum of the ocean through the open window. There are some arguments you don't need to win out loud. The next morning, I opened the drawer where I kept my documents. Birth certificate, licenses, old contracts. Buried underneath was a copy of the original deed to the house, yellowed at the edges but still intact. My name, Margaret Hale, printed in black ink across the top line. I traced the letters with my finger. The ink was faded, but the ownership wasn't. For a long moment, I just stared at it. That paper wasn't worth much anymore, legally, emotionally, but it was the last thing they hadn't taken. I folded it neatly, slipped it into a manila envelope, and wrote on the front in blue pen. For later use. Then I sealed it. That phrase became my quiet mantra. When I caught myself thinking of Evan, for later use. When I saw a mother and son laughing on the street, for later use. When I dreamed of the old house, its windows glowing with light that no longer belonged to me, for later use. It wasn't vengeance I was saving, it was clarity. A week later, the museum hosted its first community tour since reopening. People came in smelling of sea salt and sunscreen, pointing at the restored staircases, the framed photos of old storms and new beginnings. A local journalist approached me after. You must be proud, he said. You've given this place a second life. I smiled. That's what I do best. But inside, a different voice whispered, and maybe soon, I'll reclaim mine. That night, another message arrived. Short. Unsigned. We know what you're planning. Don't embarrass yourself. No name, no number. Just the words. I sat in the dark for a while, phone in hand, pulse steady. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and relentless. It was almost funny. I used to fear storms. They made everything else sound smaller. I pulled out the envelope again. The ink on, for later use, had bled slightly from the damp air. I smiled and rewrote it, darker this time. For later use, I said out loud. Because later always comes. I slid the envelope into my leather satchel and locked the clasp. Then, I reached for my keys. The new ring for the museum, and the old silver one for the house that wasn't mine. I held them both together, their weight uneven but familiar. You'll both have your turn, I whispered. That night, before sleeping, I stood by the window. The storm outside was growing louder. The waves crashed against the shore, white foam spraying against the glass. The kind of sound that used to scare me when I was young. The sound of something breaking. Now it sounded like preparation. I turned off the light, lay down, and felt the building tremble faintly in the wind. And for the first time since that door had slammed behind me, I didn't feel like a victim standing outside. I felt like the architect, quietly measuring the fault lines, waiting for the perfect time to rebuild, or to make something fall. Let them think it's over, I murmured to the dark. The quiet ones always draw the best blueprints. It was a gray morning, one of those that smells like wet iron and unfinished apologies. I had just finished sketching the new exhibit layout when I heard the car pull up outside the museum. A black SUV. Polished. Out of place in this quiet coastal town. Through the window, I saw them. Evan and Claire, both in business clothes, both looking like people who'd already rehearsed their lines. A man in a navy suit followed them out, briefcase in hand. Another lawyer? Of course. Yeah. I didn't move right away. I watched them cross the gravel path, watched Claire look around at the old building with mild disdain. She'd always hated anything that couldn't be bought new. I met them at the door before they could knock. Well, I said softly, it must be important for you to drive all this way. Claire smiled, tight and bright. We thought it'd be easier to talk face to face. Easier for whom? No one answered. I stepped aside, motioning them in. Come in then. It's been a while since I served my own family tea like guests. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and dust. I set 3 cups on the table, poured tea evenly, steady hand, steady voice. The same ceremony I used when smoothing cracks in plaster. Patience first, precision second. Even avoided my eyes. Claire didn't bother. She looked around the room like she was inspecting a property. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale, we'll get straight to the point. The city has filed notice of unpaid property tax on the house in New Orleans. To resolve this, Mr. and Mrs. Hale intend to sell the property. He slid an envelope across the table, manila, heavy. We'll need your signature to finalize the transfer. I took a slow sip of tea. And why would my signature be required if I no longer own the house? Claire's lips curved. Because your name is still listed as secondary beneficiary. We can't move forward without your consent. And what happens if I don't consent? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Then the city will seize the house for debt. You'll lose whatever remains of your claim. Oh, this is a rescue. A favor, she said. The air between us thickened. The clock ticked softly. The only sound brave enough to speak. I looked at my son. Evan, tell me, this isn't how you want to fix things. He shifted in his seat, voice low. Mom, we just need closure. We can't keep dragging this on. Closure, I repeated. That's what we call it when we bury something still alive. He looked away again. Claire leaned forward, her tone crisp. Let's be practical. You're not living there. You don't contribute to maintenance or taxes. It's just a formality. Formality, I echoed. The word people, used when they want to pretend ethics are optional. The lawyer coughed gently, uncomfortable. Mrs. Hale, if you sign today, the proceeds from the sale can include a goodwill percentage for you. A symbolic gesture. Symbolic? I smiled, slow and sharp. I built that house from the ground up, Mr. Prashin. Porter. Every inch of it passed under my hands. If we're dealing in symbols, then my labor was the foundation your clients stand on. He hesitated. Claire rolled her eyes. Bei ni ko ai ting ba kong, she said, slipping into Vietnamese for the first time. Sharp and deliberate. Her accent was perfect, her cruelty fluent. I didn't flinch. I leaned back, resting my hand lightly on the table. The law doesn't have to believe me, I said evenly. The law believes paperwork. And the last signature filed on that permit, the one that certified structural safety, was mine. I took another sip of tea. And that signature has never left my hand. The lawyer exchanged a look with Claire. Something unspoken passed, a crack in the performance. We don't want this to get ugly, Mrs. Hale, he said carefully. Ugly? I smiled. I restore buildings that have survived hurricanes. Wanna. Trust me, I know ugly. Evan's voice broke through, quiet, desperate. Mom, please, don't turn this into a fight. I looked at him for a long time. My son, my first blueprint of hope. His face was pale, edges softened by fear. You already turned it into one, Evan. I'm just making sure the walls don't fall on me. The tension hummed like a power line. Claire's patience snapped first. Fine, she said sharply, standing. He tried being decent. If you want to drag this out, Go ahead. You'll just embarrass yourself. No one's going to side with an old woman clinging to a house she doesn't live in. I rose too, slowly, deliberately. My chair scraped the floor like a warning. You're right, I said. No one sides with old women. That's why we learned to stand alone. I walked to the window and pointed toward the ocean beyond the dunes. The waves were hitting hard now, crashing against the rocks with perfect rhythm. You know what I love about the sea? I said softly. It takes everything people build too close to the edge. Every pier, every fence, every illusion of control. The sea always reclaims what was never truly theirs. I turned back, met her eyes. And that house was never yours. Hyuntae. Evan stood suddenly. Enough. Let's go. He grabbed the folder, but not before I reached across the table and laid my hand on it. Leave it. He hesitated. For a moment, our eyes met, not as mother and son, but as two people standing on opposite sides of a fault line. He whispered. Why are you doing this? Because, Evan, I said quietly. I once taught you how to build a house that could survive a storm. Today, I'm teaching you how to stand when you've lost one. The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended like dust in sunlight. Claire turned away, jaw tight, eyes bright with something dangerously close to fear. The lawyer gathered his things quickly, murmuring something about rescheduling. They left without finishing their tea. When the door closed behind them, I stood for a while, listening to the echo of their footsteps fading across the gravel. He had gone cold. The house was silent again, but not the same kind of silence. This one had edges, sharp, defined. The kind of silence you could build something out of. I sat back down, opened the folder they'd left behind, and slipped out the unsigned contract. On top of it, I placed the envelope I'd written weeks ago, the one labeled, for later use. Reader, I whispered, it seems, is now. I sealed both in a larger envelope and wrote a new label in black ink. Blueprint for truth. Then I tucked it into my satchel, next to the keys. The sea outside roared louder, as if approving. That night, as rain lashed the windows, I replayed the scene in my head. Every word, every twitch, every tremor in my son's voice. And when sleep finally came, I dreamed of standing inside my old house again, not as a guest, not as a ghost, but as its architect, watching the cracks fill with light instead of lies. The first rumor came like mold, unseen, then everywhere. At first, it was just a whisper in a message from an old neighbor in New Orleans. Margaret, people are saying you've not been well. That you're having memory issues? Claire mentioned you were seeing someone for it? I stared at the text until the screen dimmed. Then I read it again, slower, as if the meaning might change. Memory issues. Not well. It was subtle, professional, the kind of lie that wears a suit. 2 days later, a former colleague called. Hey Maggie. Listen, I got a weird email. Someone asked if you're still legally fit to sign contracts. Is everything okay? I laughed, but it came out wrong. The kind of laugh that sounds like paper tearing. Everything's fine, I said. Just another renovation project. Same old foundations, same old cracks. He hesitated before hanging up. I could almost hear the doubt in his silence. Soon after, the neighbors in Seabrook began to look at me differently. Not with malice, with pity. At the grocery store, Mrs. Nye Green offered to help me find my car, even though it was right in front of us. The barista at the cafe started writing my order on a slip before I spoke. So you don't forget again, sweetie. I smiled through all of it. Because that's what people with memory issues are supposed to do. Smile and agree. I didn't have to guess who started it. Claire was too intelligent for tantrums. She preferred strategy. She must have realized after our last meeting that brute force wouldn't work. So she chose corrosion instead. Slow, polite, deniable. Destroy the credibility, not the person. It was effective. By the end of the month, I'd lost a small consulting gig. Budget changes, they said, but I knew. Even Evan's messages changed tone. Shorter. Colder. Mom, maybe take some rest. Claire says you've been confused about paperwork. Or worried about you. Worried. the most dangerous word in the language of betrayal. One morning, I went down to the shore before sunrise, just to think. The air smelled of salt and iron. My reflection on the water looked pale, half erased. I picked up a small shell and held it to my ear, the way I used to show Evan when he was little. Listen, I whispered to no one. You can still hear the sea, even after you've been thrown on land. Back at the museum, I threw myself into work. The east wing was almost finished. I repainted, restored, rewired. My hands ached, my back screamed, but the rhythm of labor kept the noise of gossip out. Then, one afternoon, as I was sanding an old window frame, I heard a man's voice behind me. You still work like you're 25, Margaret Hale. I turned. It was Thomas Green, the owner of the Mariners Rest Hotel downtown, an old client from 15 years ago. His hair had gone white, but his smile hadn't aged a day. Tom Green, I said, wiping dust off my face. Thought you'd retired. Love. He laughed. Didn't take. I heard you were here, figured I'd see if the rumors were true. The words stung, but his tone was kind. Which rumors? That you're still the best dam restoration architect on the coast. I smiled despite myself. Well, I don't argue with truth. He looked at the half-fixed window. I bought an old place up the hill. The Beaumont estate. It's falling apart. Locals say it's haunted. I say it's neglected. Want to prove them wrong? For a moment I couldn't answer. The Beaumont. I'd seen it once. A massive colonial mansion with broken shutters and vines crawling up the walls like veins. No one had lived there for decades. You're serious? Completely, he said. I want it restored right. And I want you to oversee it. I laughed softly. Tom, you know my reputation's been questioned lately. He shrugged. So what? The best structures are the ones people stop believing in. I started the project the next week. When I first stepped into the Beaumont estate, the air was thick with mildew and silence. The floor groaned under my boots, the wallpaper peeled like tired skin. But underneath it all, I felt life. Like the house was holding its breath, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. I know the feeling, I whispered to the walls. Each day, I worked from dawn till late afternoon, measuring beams, sketching columns, mapping the decay. The house was vast, but its rhythm was steady, like therapy you could walk through. Word spread fast, of course. Some people said the crazy architect was back at it again. Others said the haunted house had found its ghost. I ignored them. But one evening, as I was locking up, a familiar car stopped outside the gate, Evan's SUV. He looked tired, thinner. For a brief, foolish second, I thought he'd come to apologize. Mom, he said quietly, you need to stop this. Claire's worried. About what? My sanity or my independence? She just doesn't want you to get hurt. Hurt? I smiled faintly. Evan, I've been rebuilding homes hit by hurricanes since before you were born. You think I'm scared of a rumor? He exhaled, rubbing his temples. It's not just rumors. She's filed an evaluation request for competency. The world tilted slightly. You mean a medical review? It's nothing formal yet, just she's trying to protect the family assets. I almost laughed. Protect them from what? The woman who bought them. He didn't answer. Evan, I said, look at me. He did, reluctantly. Do I look like someone who doesn't know what she's doing? His silence was the answer I didn't want. After he left, I sat on the front steps of the Beaumont, staring at the broken gates. The moonlight hit the rusted hinges, making them gleam like scars. For a moment, I wanted to cry, not from fear, from exhaustion, but tears felt useless, like pouring water on stone. So instead, I went inside, opened my sketchbook, and began to draw. I didn't draw blueprints this time. I drew people. Evan is a boy, holding a hammer too big for his hands. Claire, sharp-edged, half-shaded. Myself, older, smaller, but still holding the keys. When I finished, I looked at the sketch and whispered, they want to make me invisible. Let them try. Some things don't disappear, they just get rebuilt in stronger material. Over the next few weeks, the work at Beaumont became my refuge. I replaced rotten beams, rebuilt windows, cleared debris. The house began to breathe again, slow, deep, steady. Each creak of wood felt like defiance. Each nail I drove into place was a heartbeat. Visitors began to stop by. Some out of curiosity, others out of respect. One woman from town said, "They call you the ghost lady, but you're the only one bringing this house back to life." I smiled. Ghosts make good company. They don't lie. Then, one afternoon, Tom Green arrived with a newspaper folded under his arm. He set it on the table without a word. Front page, local section. Headline: Former architect under question. Family raises concerns over mental health and finances. My photo, old, unflattering, cropped from a charity event, stared back at me. For a long time, I didn't speak. The world outside the window blurred into rain. Tom poured me a cup of coffee, said gently, "You gonna fight this?" I looked at the headline again. My name underlined, the tone clinical, distant. "Well, no," I said finally. "I'm going to finish this house." He nodded slowly. "And then?" "Then I'll rebuild the truth too. The first, the walls." That night, I stood in the middle of the grand foyer of the Beaumont, alone. The chandeliers hung crooked, the floor half-patched, the air damp with old salt. I placed my palm on the nearest pillar. The wood was warm, alive. "They called you haunted," I whispered. They called me unstable. Guess we're both under renovation. Outside, lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the scaffolding like bones of something ancient, learning how to stand again. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Not out of pride, not even hope, but recognition. "They can call me mad," I said softly, "but I build proof, and proof doesn't vanish, it stands." The truth was brought to light, forcing the community, the press, and witnesses to confront the chain of events. Once the truth was in the open, it was much harder to bury it with legal procedures. I put the for-later-use envelope in my leather pouch, next to the silver key. I was in no hurry. I had learned patience. Rebuilding a wall quickly was easy, but rebuilding a solid foundation required time and planning. As night fell, I stood at my desk, looking at the pile of papers spread out like a map. Each piece of evidence was a path leading to the truth. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I just smiled, the smile of a craftsman who had found a flaw in the structure. "They think the truth can be printed falsely," I whispered. "They haven't met anyone who can read ink." And then I started making a list. People to call, newspapers to invite, documents to be notarized. The plan had begun. I placed the first stamp for later use. When you've spent your life restoring broken structures, you learn one thing: you never strike first. You let the cracks show themselves. I wasn't planning revenge. Fully sighed, I was preparing proof. The plan had been taking shape quietly ever since I discovered the forged mortgage papers. Every evening after work at the Beaumont estate, I would sit by the window of my small apartment, surrounded by folders, sketches, and coffee cups. The sea wind carried the smell of salt and iron through the room, the smell of truth before a storm. That's when the idea came to me. If they wanted to bury me privately, I'd resurrect the truth publicly. And what better place than the museum? The one space in town that still believed in preservation, in stories that outlived their owners. I reached out to my network of young architects and designers, the ones I'd mentored over the years, the ones who still called me Ms. Hale, with respect instead of pity. We met in the east wing of the museum one Friday evening. Dust hung in the sunlight like quiet applause. "I want to host a small exhibition," I told them. "A story told in wood, glass, and photographs, about houses that were rebuilt and the people who refused to vanish when they were told to leave." They listened. No one asked why. Maybe because they'd all heard the rumors, seen my name dragged through polite gossip. But they also knew my work. They'd seen me resurrect ruins. Lena, the youngest in the group, asked carefully, "So it's about architecture?" "About truth," I said. "But architecture is how truth holds its shape." We called it Restoring Home. Stories of those rebuilt after being cast out. In Vietnamese, the subtitle would have read, Shi Xin Ehce, Kai Chin, Kai Hien, Ing Ichi, by Yu Chi Chi My In Chi I, My In Chia. Each wall would hold before and after photos of restoration projects I'd worked on throughout my career. The storm shelters, the burned cottages, the forgotten schools. Every frame would carry a small plaque, designed and restored by Margaret Hale. For those who refused to stay broken, and at the very end, on the final wall, there would be one last photograph. The house that started it all. My house. The house my son and his wife now claimed. I didn't need to explain the significance to my team. They saw it in my face when I laid the photo on the table. The pale blue shutters, the brick porch, the magnolia tree leaning slightly to the left. That one, I said quietly. Make sure it's the last thing they see before they exit. Lena frowned. Do you want to label it? I nodded. I'd already written the text. Design. Margaret Hale ownership. Under dispute. 4 words that could undo years of lies, not with accusation, but with calm precision. The weeks leading up to the opening felt like sharpening a blade you pretended was just a tool. I spent hours sorting through photographs, contracts, and notes. Amelia, my curator friend, helped design the exhibit layout. She made sure the lighting hit each image just right, soft enough to honor, strong enough to reveal. Sometimes she'd glance at me and ask, "Are you ready for the noise this will cause?" I'd smile. Noise means people are listening. On the eve of the opening, I walked through the exhibition alone. The museum was silent, except for the hum of the air vents and the faint sound of rain outside. Every photo on the wall told a story of endurance. A school rebuilt after a fire. A fisherman's house restored after a hurricane. A bridge repainted by volunteers after a flood. Each frame felt like a piece of my heartbeat suspended in light. But the last one, my house, stopped me cold. The photograph glowed under the overhead spotlight. I could see everything. The careful symmetry of the columns, the cracked step on the porch, the faint shadow of a woman reflected in the glass. Me, the day I finished the restoration. Below it, the small brass plaque gleamed. Design. Margaret Hale ownership. Under dispute, I read the words aloud, just to hear how they sounded in the air. They didn't tremble. Neither did I. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sea outside was loud, restless. I sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold, the light from the street lamp catching the edge of the keyring on my desk. 5 silver keys, one for every chapter of my life. I turned the oldest one between my fingers. The melted remnant from Mrs. the Bird Nest. Lang's storm shelter decades ago. We're almost there, I whispered to it. One more door. The morning of the exhibition arrived bright and sharp. Reporters came, local first, then regional. The invitation Amelia had sent, read. An exhibition on architecture, truth, and the meaning of home. I smiled at the irony. People would come expecting to see art. They would leave having witnessed evidence. The museum buzzed with quiet curiosity. Guests wandered through the hall, murmuring softly. I watched them from a distance. Architects, journalists, a few city officials. When they reached the final wall, the murmurs grew louder. One woman gasped. Another whispered my name. Someone began snapping photos of the plaque. Then I saw it. A tall man in the back of the crowd, phone raised. Evan. My son. He was reading the plaque, face pale, eyes darting toward me. Beside him, Claire stood frozen, fury twisting beneath her polite smile. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment, the museum went silent. Even the air felt like it was holding its breath. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The wall did the talking. The truth was hanging right in front of them. Framed, labeled, illuminated. When the press approached me for a statement, I simply said, "Every building tells a story." I only restored the ones that tried to erase me. I didn't mention the forged documents, the false rumors, or the nights spent gathering evidence. Those would surface soon enough. After the articles, after the photographs went viral, That was the beauty of truth. Once it's seen, it can't be unseen. Later that evening, when the crowd thinned and the museum emptied, I stood before the last photograph one more time. The plaque glinted in the dim light, and for the first time in years, I felt no anger, no grief, only certainty. "You tried to take my house," I whispered, "but you built my platform." The echo of my voice disappeared into the stillness, leaving only the faint hum of the lights, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing the next storm would not catch me unprepared. The morning of the exhibition felt unreal. The museum's marble floors glimmered beneath soft lights, polished until they reflected the crowd gathering outside. Photographers checked their lenses, reporters fixed their microphones, and in the corner of the room, the brass plaque beneath my house gleamed like it had been waiting for this day all along. I arrived early, before anyone else. The air was still, the kind of silence that hums before thunder. I ran my fingers along the frames one last time, adjusting the lighting on the final wall. My hands didn't tremble. When the doors opened, the sea of voices began. Guests murmured in admiration. Cameras flashed. Somewhere behind me, Amelia was briefing the press. The exhibition was supposed to be about architecture, about the bones of homes and the beauty of restoration. But everyone knew why they were really there. Rumors had already circulated, the disinherited architect staging a public comeback. The air vibrated with curiosity and danger. The first hour went smoothly. People moved through the gallery like respectful ghosts. They pointed at the photos, read the captions, nodded solemnly. Then, in the reflection of a glass frame, I saw movement at the door. A pair of silhouettes I could recognize from any distance. Evan. Claire. They hadn't been invited. Of course they hadn't. Claire was in heels too high for the cobblestone walkway, her perfume arriving before she did. Evan followed, his shoulders stiff, face pale with a mix of dread and determination. The museum guard looked to me for direction. I nodded. Let them in. The whispering started immediately. Reporters turned, cameras followed. And for the first time in months, I didn't look away. They came straight to the final wall. To the photograph. Claire stopped in front of it like someone staring at her own reflection and finding it cracked. "Take this down," she said sharply. Her voice cut through the room. "This is defamatory." People froze. Heads turned, phones lifted discreetly. I stepped forward. Calm. "It's a public exhibition," I said. "Every photograph here is part of my documented work, including that one." "You can't display it," she hissed. "Oh, it's private property." "Property?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Interesting word choice. Evan's voice came next, quieter but heavier. "Mom, please. Don't do this here." "Do what, Evan? You're humiliating us." I smiled faintly. "You did that yourselves." Claire turned to the reporters, voice trembling but composed. A performance she'd practiced. "Woman is unstable. She's been harassing us, spreading lies about ownership." "You all saw the article?" I didn't interrupt her. I just reached into my bag, pulled out a slim folder, and laid it on the podium beside me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice clear enough to cut through the murmurs, "since my mental health seems to be on public trial, allow me to submit my own evidence." The room stilled. Camera lights blinked on. I unfolded the first document. The certificate of architectural authorship issued by the state. I held it up so the nearest journalist could photograph it. "This is the state-registered proof that I, Margaret Hale, designed and restored the property located at 314 Magnolia Lane. You'll see the serial number, the signatures of the licensing board, and the date of issuance. 3 years before the property was transferred under contested circumstances." Then came the second document, the restoration contract, stamped and notarized. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is the legal contract between myself and the City Heritage Office. It lists me as the supervising architect, and it includes the official permits issued under my name. Not under Claire's, not under Evan's, under mine." Reporters began snapping photos furiously. Claire's face had gone pale, her practiced calm slipping like paint in the rain. My ground. But I wasn't finished. And since truth loves company, I said, I brought one more thing. I took out my phone and connected it to the small speaker the museum used for guided tours. The crowd leaned forward instinctively. Then I pressed play. The audio filled the room. My voice, trembling slightly, and Claire's voice, sharp and unmistakable. From now on, you are no longer a member of this family. Gasps. Even the lights seemed to flicker. Evan's head snapped toward her, shock widening his eyes. Claire? What? But she was already shaking her head. That's taken out of context. I stopped the recording. There is no context, I said quietly, that justifies that sentence. For a heartbeat, the entire room froze. The journalists stopped writing. The young architects who had helped set up the show stared at me with something like awe. Then Evan spoke, his voice breaking. Mom, why are you doing this? I looked at him. Really looked. The boy who once built sandcastles beside me. The young man who had held my hand at his graduation. And I said the only truth left between us. Because you forgot who built the ground you're standing on. The silence that followed was the purest kind. No noise, no defense, no lies. Even Claire couldn't fill it. I turned back to the audience. This exhibition isn't about revenge, I said. It's about credit, about truth, about what happens when we let someone else write our name out of our own blueprint. The applause began hesitantly, then grew. Steady, rolling, unstoppable. Claire grabbed Evan's arm. We're leaving, she hissed. They pushed through the crowd as flashes went off. Reporters followed, questions flying like stones. Mrs. Hale, do you deny the recording? Mr. Hale, did your mother fund the renovation? Is there an ongoing investigation into the forged documents? I didn't have to chase them. The truth was already doing that for me. When they were gone, I stood in front of the photograph again. My house. My design. My history. The lights made the glass shimmer, and for a moment I saw my own reflection layered over the image. Older, steadier, unafraid. I raised the microphone one last time. They took my keys once, I said, voice calm, clear, unshaken. But they'll never open my door again. Afterward, the museum stayed open late. Journalists filed their stories. Cameras caught the plaque glinting under light. By nightfall, the exhibition had already gone viral. Headlines spreading online like wildfire. Disinherited architect. Exposes family fraud at public exhibition. Margaret Hale, the woman who rebuilt her life and her truth. When the last guest left, I sat alone in the empty gallery. The moonlight slanted through the glass ceiling, painting silver lines on the floor. The photograph of the house seemed softer now, almost forgiving. Amelia walked up quietly behind me. You realize this will explode tomorrow, she said. I nodded. Good. Maybe it'll light the way for someone else. She smiled faintly. You've changed, Margaret. No, I said, standing to face the photograph. I just stopped knocking on locked doors. Before leaving, I took one final look around the room. Every wall told a story of survival. But this one, my wall, told the story of reclamation. I ran my fingers over the brass plaque again, tracing the words, under dispute. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a pen, and added one small note underneath. Status, resolved. The ink bled slightly, but the letters held. Outside, the night air was cool, the wind carrying the faint scent of sea salt. I held my keyring up to the moonlight. 5 old silver keys catching the glow. For years they'd been relics of loss. Tonight, they sounded like victory. They can take the key to my house, I whispered to the dark, but no one will ever open the door to me without my permission again. I walked home with the keys in my pocket, their weight finally right. Not heavy, not haunting, just earned. In the weeks after the exhibition, the world turned noisier than it had in years. Articles, interviews, phone calls. The story spread like ivy climbing up old walls, unstoppable once it found light. Some headlines were flattering, others cruel. Architect of her own redemption. Family feud in frames. A masterclass in revenge by design. But I didn't correct any of them. Because for the first time, the noise didn't belong to me. It belonged to the truth. I didn't file lawsuits. I didn't demand apologies. What would be the point? Courtrooms are for people who still need permission to be right. I already had mine. Signed by reality itself, witnessed by a room full of strangers who finally saw me. A month later, I walked away from the Beaumont Estate project with payment in full and a handshake from Tom Green. He said, "You rebuilt that house like it had a soul." I smiled. Every ruin does. You just have to speak its language. I used part of the payment to buy a small property 10 miles inland. A half-collapsed colonial villa that had been abandoned after a storm years ago. The roof had fallen in, vines crawled through the broken windows. Everyone in town called it the ghost house. When I first walked through it, I could smell rot, salt, and possibility. The sunlight fell through holes in the ceiling, tracing patterns on the floor like blessings disguised as decay. I knew immediately, this was the one. For months I worked quietly, no press, no cameras, just the sound of hammer and rain. The house fought me at first. Every beam complained, every wall crumbled at touch. But I kept at it. Sometimes, the neighbors would stop by and watch from the gate. They didn't ask what I was doing. Maybe they'd already read enough about me to know the answer. By spring, the house had begun to breathe again. Fresh paint covered the walls, a new roof caught the light. And on the front lawn, I placed a small handmade wooden sign. Reclaimed home. A house belonging to someone who once lost hers. People smiled when they passed it. Some stopped to take pictures. But for me, it wasn't a statement. It was a heartbeat. One morning, as I was planting ivy along the porch, a young woman approached. She looked nervous, holding a notebook against her chest. "Ms. Hale?" she asked softly. "I'm a student from the design school in the city. I read your story. My family lost our house last year. I thought I'd never draw again. But after seeing your exhibition, I changed my major to architecture." I wiped the dirt from my hands, smiled, and handed her the trowel. "And start here," I said. "Every architect needs to build her first wall with her own hands." She laughed shakily, almost crying. "Can I come back to learn?" "Anytime," I said. "This place was made for people who know what it's like to start over." By summer, Reclaimed Home wasn't just a house, it became a workshop. Women from the town came by on weekends to learn small repairs, sanding wood, painting shutters, replacing hinges. Some brought coffee, others brought stories. No one talked about lawsuits or betrayal anymore. We talked about how to rebuild, not how we were broken. And that, I realized, was the real freedom. Not proving someone wrong, but living so fully that no lie can fit inside your walls anymore. One evening, after everyone had gone, I stood on the porch watching the sky burn orange. The air smelled of new paint and lilacs. Inside, the lights glowed warm, reflecting off the freshly polished floors. I sat on the steps with a cup of tea, the same old silver keyring beside me. 5 keys, tarnished, heavy, but still here. I turned the oldest one in my hand, the one I'd melted from Mrs. Feng's key decades ago. "We made it," I whispered. "We found the right door." The sea wind carried my words away. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Faint, harmless. I smiled. Let it rain. I'd built this roof myself. The next morning, I added one final detail to the house. A brass plaque beside the door, engraved in both English and Vietnamese. Reclaimed home, home of the homeless. Every loss has a blueprint for return. I polished it until the metal caught the sun, gleaming like a mirror. For a moment, I saw my reflection in it. Older, lined, but peaceful. Later that day, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A property release form signed by Evan. No note, no apology, just a signature. I held it for a long time, feeling the irony. He had finally learned how to let go. The one thing I couldn't teach him when he was young. I folded the paper, placed it inside the old envelope marked for later use, and tucked it into my desk drawer. Then I locked the drawer using one of the silver keys. Some doors are meant to stay closed, not out of anger, but completion. As dusk settled, I walked through the finished rooms of the villa. Every creak, every glimmer of light felt like a conversation between the past and the present. In the living room, I hung a single photograph, the one from the exhibition. The caption remained the same, but I added a new line beneath it: designed, lost, reclaimed. I stepped back and looked at it. For the first time, I didn't feel the sting of memory, just gratitude. That night, as I locked the front door, I whispered my own benediction. They once took my house. Now I build homes for those still looking for theirs. The latch clicked. The air was cool, kind, final. And under the porch light, the brass plaque gleamed, steady as truth, warm as forgiveness. A year has passed since the exhibition. The world has gone quiet again. But it's the right kind of quiet this time. The kind that smells like morning coffee and sawdust, like walls breathing after a fresh coat of paint. Every sunrise feels like a soft rehearsal for gratitude. The Reclaimed Home project has become more than just my house. It's now a space for others, a workshop, a classroom, and sometimes a sanctuary. We named the program Home Rebirth. We teach women, mostly middle-aged, mostly tired, mostly underestimated, how to rebuild not only their walls but also themselves. Some were divorced and left with nothing. Some were scammed out of their savings. Some simply walked away from lives that no longer fit. Every week, they come with stories stitched into their palms, and together, we trade silence for the sound of hammers and laughter. The first morning class always begins the same way. The air smells of fresh paint and coffee. Light filters through the wide windows I installed myself. Sunlight that used to fall through broken glass now lands on hopeful faces. The walls are lined with photos of restoration projects, but at the center of the room, hanging from a thin metal beam, is my silver keyring. 5 old keys, polished and shining, turning slowly in the breeze from the ceiling fan. It's not decoration. It's a reminder. The women always notice it first. They ask, "Whose keys are those?" And I answer, they belong to someone who had to lose every door before learning which ones were worth opening. That morning, the class was full. 12 women, each sitting behind a small wooden workbench, each holding a set of tools I'd saved from my old studio. I walked between them, correcting their grip on paintbrushes, showing them how to steady a drill, how to measure twice and cut once. They laughed nervously, then louder. I could see pieces of myself in every one of them. The tremble in their hands when they touched a tool for the first time, the disbelief when the paint finally covered what used to hurt. They were all learning the same truth I did. Rebuilding isn't about erasing what broke. It's about claiming it as part of your design. Halfway through class, a woman named Julia looked up from the piece of wood she was sanding. Her face was kind but lined with exhaustion. "Ms. Hale," she asked softly, "were you ever scared? I mean, after losing everything?" The room went still. I wiped my hands on a cloth and leaned against the table, smiling. "All the time," I said. "I was scared I'd never belong anywhere again. Scared I'd wake up one day and forget what home felt like." I paused, watching the light dance on the keys above us. But fear doesn't disappear when you get your house back. It disappears when you stop waiting for someone else to hand you the keys. Julia nodded slowly, eyes shining. Around the room, I could feel the women listening harder than before, the way people do when they're not just hearing words, but hearing permission. When the class ended, they gathered their things: brushes, small repaired frames, freshly painted boards, and I handed each of them a small silver key tied with a red string. They weren't meant to open anything. They were symbols. Every door you build for yourself, I told them, starts with the courage to believe you deserve to walk through it. Some of them cried. Some just smiled and tucked the keys into their pockets. When the last woman left, I stayed behind to clean the benches. The scent of varnish filled the air, warm and familiar. Outside, the garden I'd planted around the porch had begun to bloom again. Wild roses, stubborn ivy, and lavender that caught the evening light. It didn't look perfect. That was the point. After locking up, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The silver keys above the classroom swayed gently, catching the sunset. I thought of everything that had happened. The locks, the lies, the papers, the exhibition, the silence that followed. And then I thought of what had not happened. No court battles, no revenge, no apologies. Just peace. Sometimes the best victory isn't taking back what was stolen. It's realizing you no longer need it to feel whole. That evening, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name written in careful handwriting. Inside was a photo, Evan, standing in front of a small house, a baby in his arms. Letter. Just that image. I stared at it for a long time. He looked older, softer, maybe a little haunted, but the baby, his daughter, was smiling. I placed the photo on the shelf beside a tiny clay model of a house one of my students had made. Then I whispered, "Build it right this time, son." And that was enough. The next morning, I opened the workshop early. The sunlight came in low and gold, turning the dust in the air into glitter. As I set the kettle to boil, I heard footsteps behind me. One of the new students, a widow named Elise, stood at the door. Sorry," she said shyly. "I'm early. I couldn't sleep." I smiled. "Perfect. Neither could I." She looked around the room, eyes wide. "It's beautiful here," she said. "It feels safe." "It's meant to," I replied. "Safety isn't about walls. It's about knowing you can walk out and still have somewhere to return." She nodded slowly, glancing up at the keys above us. "Ms. Hale," she asked, "do you ever worry about being thrown out again?" The question landed softly, but it went straight through me. I smiled, not sad, just full. "No," I said, "because now every door I open is mine." Otto whistled. The first students of the day arrived, carrying stories and paint-stained hope. The sound of laughter began again. Hammers tapping, brushes scratching, music playing from someone's phone. Outside, a sign swayed gently in the wind. The words carved by one of the students. "Reclaimed home. Home of the homeless." Beneath it, in smaller letters, we added a new line last week. "Where doors are made to stay open." As the morning went on, I stood by the window, watching sunlight spill across the tables, the keys glinting above, the women creating something solid out of what once was broken. And I thought to myself, maybe this was always the plan, to lose a house so I could help others build one within themselves. Later, while the students took a break, I picked up the old keyring again, the one that started it all. 5 keys, each with a story. One to a house that no longer existed. One to a studio I built and left behind. One to a museum that held my truth. One to the villa I now called home. And one that never fit any lock. The melted silver from Mrs. Past, Lang's storm shelter. I tied that last one to the ceiling beam beside the others. Together, they made a faint musical sound when the breeze passed through. It didn't sound like loss anymore. It sounded like freedom. I turned to face the class, heart steady, hands ink-stained from marking blueprints for a new roof we'd design together next week. "Right?" I said. "Let's begin again." They smiled, waiting for direction. I pointed at the wall of photos. Before and afters, damage and repair, pain and beauty. "Remember," I told them, "we don't rebuild to forget. We rebuild so the wind has somewhere safe to pass through." And as they started to work, I whispered the line that had carried me through every broken wall, every slammed door, every morning like this one. I was once thrown out of my own house, and now I open doors for others to walk into their freedom. Bye. The camera light blinks red. I sit in the center of the workshop, surrounded by the hum of tools and the faint smell of fresh paint. Behind me, sunlight spills across the wooden tables where the women from Home Rebirth have left their half-finished frames and mugs of cold coffee. I take a breath, glance at the silver keys swaying gently above me, and then look straight into the lens. "If one day," I begin quietly, "someone closes a door in your face, remember this. You still have the key." I let the silence sit. It's the kind of silence that makes people listen harder. "And sometimes," I continue, voice steady, The door most worth opening is the one called starting over. I lean forward, resting my hands on the workbench. The same one I built with reclaimed oak from the first house I ever restored. I used to think freedom came from having a roof over your head, I say. Now I know. It comes from knowing you can build one yourself. The camera pans slightly, catching the plaque on the wall. Reclaimed home. Home of the homeless. When they locked me out, I thought I'd lost everything. My home, my family, my name. But what I really lost was the illusion that belonging needs someone else's permission. He paused, smiling softly. It took me 58 years to realize. Sometimes exile is just the universe handing you your blueprint back. I pick up one of the small silver keys we give every student after their course. The light catches it, flashes briefly like a spark. Every woman who walks through this room leaves with one of these, I say. It doesn't open any real door. It's a reminder that she still can. I hold it up to the camera. Maybe you need one too. Behind me, the sound of footsteps. A few of the students returning, laughing softly, arranging brushes for the next class. I gesture toward them. These women aren't architects by trade. But they are builders. Of patience, of courage, of lives that no one else could draft for them. I glance back at the lens. And if you're watching this, maybe you're a builder too. You just haven't picked up your tools yet. The tone shifts. Gentle, but deliberate. Here's what I ask. Share this story. Not for me, but for the woman somewhere sitting in a car outside the house she just lost. For the one holding her breath outside a lawyer's office, or staring at an empty apartment wondering who she is without an address. I take a breath. Share it so she knows. Losing a home isn't the end. It's just the sound of the foundation clearing, making space for something stronger. The air feels thick, full. The camera catches the glint of dust in the sunlight. You see, houses can collapse. Please, keys can change hands. But freedom. I touch the ring of keys above me, hearing their faint chime. Freedom is the one lock they'll never control. For a moment, I close my eyes and let the sound fill the room. Then I open them again, steady, certain. If someone ever tells you that you don't belong anymore, I say, smile. Because they've just freed you to build something that's entirely yours. I stand, moving toward the door as the camera follows. Outside, the garden glows in the late afternoon light. The wooden sign, Reclaimed Home, sways in the wind. Thank you, I say, looking back one last time. For listening, for sharing, for remembering that no door, no matter how heavy, can stay locked forever. I rest my hand on the doorknob. The same motion that once broke me now feels like a promise. And if you ever find yourself standing where I once stood, outside, holding nothing but your own courage, remember, you are not homeless. You are rebuilding. I turn the knob slowly and push the door open. Light floods the screen. My story closes here, I whisper, smiling into the brightness. But who knows? Maybe this is the first brick in your house of freedom. The door swings wide, the keys above the workshop clinking like applause.